When I walked into the bathroom, I noticed a gleam on the carpet from the sunlight filtering through the blinds. It didn't blind me, but it did catch my attention. I looked down, hoping not to step on any glass or other debris, since I was barefoot. Caroline hadn't mentioned dropping anything in the bathroom, but who knows? At first, I almost missed it because the shine was similar in color to the carpet. Eventually, I found it, a tiny piece of foil that had fallen to the floor. It was the backing from a pill strip, the little circle of foil that pops out when you push a pill out of the strip. Usually, it stays attached, but sometimes, as in this case, it comes loose. I examined it. One side was blank, but the other had markings, 2 to be precise. Since it was Wednesday, I guessed it was for Tuesday's pill. This indicated that the pills needed to be taken daily. I knew I wasn't on any medications. At 35 years old, I was healthy as a horse, and so was Caroline. We had both recently had our annual checkups and were given clean bills of health. So why was there a pill in the bathroom? One pill that came to mind was the birth control pill. Caroline hadn't been on the pill, or at least I thought she hadn't, since I had a vasectomy 2 years ago after the birth of our second and final child. She had no issues with cramps or period pain and had always had trouble-free periods. So why were there pills? I have to admit my first thought was that she might be hiding an illness she didn't want to tell me about. For a few minutes, my mind went to some dark places. But then I remembered our recent physicals. We were both clean. If the little piece of foil was here, then the pills were likely around too. I locked the door behind me, as Caroline was still in bed, and began searching. It took some time, but eventually, I found them, buried at the bottom of a tampon box, inside a box of aspirin. Pulling out the strip of pills, I immediately recognized them as the same ones Caroline had been taking before my surgery and even before that between our children. Why had she started taking them again? The only answer I could come up with was that she was having sex with someone who could get her pregnant. She had cheated on me. Caroline and I had been together for 9 years. I had just graduated from college and was studying to become an engineer when we met at a bar. Although we didn't hit it off immediately, there was enough interest for her to accept my invitation to dinner. Caroline was tall, just a few inches shorter than my 5 feet 10 inches, and had an athletic build with a thin figure and small breasts. Her ass, my favorite part of her, was amazing. We dated for about a year before getting married when I was 26. Our 2 children were 5 and 2 years old, and I had the vasectomy to avoid any more accidents. 2 kids were our limit. We had the perfect family, James and Sonia. Caroline returned to work after maternity leave for each child, not wanting to leave her job. We had an au pair who took care of the kids during the day and went home in the evening. She cost almost as much as Caroline earned, but Caroline didn't mind. She loved her job. I ran an engineering firm with a few buddies. We were never rich, but we had a great time. I cleaned up the bathroom, put the pills back, and decided I needed to think things through. Confronting her now wouldn't help. I needed a plan and proof. What happens next? I had no idea. First, I needed to gather all the facts and see where it led. I went to work as usual, considering my options. I needed to find out who, when, and for how long. Was it someone from work? Her boss, perhaps? Was this the same person she was communicating with before we met? This led me to a terrifying thought: were these kids even mine? I didn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I knew I would feel loss, betrayal, pain, and anger, but I needed to confirm what had really happened. I started by ordering DNA analysis kits. Testing the kids would be straightforward since I often put them to bed before Caroline came home. I also ordered surveillance equipment, small voice recorders for her car and bag, and tiny cameras to place around the house. I doubted she was cheating at home, given how rarely she was there when I wasn't, or at least, that's what I thought. I needed access to her phone. I knew about a cloning tool that would let me copy her phone, get all her messages and emails, and even listen to her calls. I needed to buy another phone for this. It took several days for everything to arrive. During this time, I kept a close eye on Caroline. She didn't do anything unusual. Our sex life was standard, once or twice a week, usually on weekends when we both stayed up late. I never noticed anything suspicious about her, and she never jumped into the shower as soon as she got home. Either she wasn't having an affair or she was being extremely discreet. The packages arrived on Friday morning, and I had them sent to my office to avoid any questions. I received DNA test kits, voice recorders, cameras, a cell phone, and a cloning kit. I was ready to go. That day, I left the office early. When I got home, the au pair was feeding the kids dinner before putting them to bed. I let her handle this and went to hide the cameras, one in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in the bedroom with a good view of the bed. I heard the kids splashing in the bathroom and went to help them get ready for bed. After taking a cheek swab from Sonia and putting it in my pocket, I laid her down and read to her until she fell asleep. I checked on James, he was still awake, and the babysitter was still reading to him. I offered to replace her so she could go home, and she gratefully accepted. It didn't take long for James to take the swab, and within 20 minutes, he was fast asleep. I packed up the swabs, including the one from my own cheek, and put them in the mailbox. The postman would pick them up in the morning. The service promised results online within 48 business hours, so that meant by Wednesday. Caroline arrived home right on time, and we went about our usual routine. We each talked about our day, though neither of us really listened to the other. We had dinner, and then she went to take a shower. I used this opportunity to install voice recorders in her car and bag, and to clone her mobile phone. I checked the clone for any incriminating messages or emails, but found nothing. Either she was very careful or she wasn't cheating, I couldn't decide. The weekend passed as usual. We had sex both mornings before the kids woke up, which had become almost a ritual. She had no calls or messages, and since we spent all our time together, I had no way to check if she was taking her pills. However, I checked the pill strip and saw the corresponding days were gone. Since it was just the two of us at home over the weekend and I didn't take the pills, I concluded she did. On Monday, I told her I would be working from home. She went to the office, and I took the chance to check the flash drives from all the cameras. The bathroom camera confirmed she had taken the pills, but the real surprise was on the bedroom camera. On Saturday night, while I was preparing dinner, she took a shower in the bedroom and used her phone to text someone. There was nothing on the phone I cloned, so she must have a second phone. It definitely wasn't in her bag, so where was it? I watched her after she finished texting. She walked over to the ventilation duct, released the latch, and hid the phone inside. I immediately checked the air duct but didn't find the phone. She must hide it there when she's at home but takes it with her when she leaves. I needed access to this phone. This was the first concrete evidence she was up to something, though I still didn't know what. I watched footage of her getting dressed that morning and saw her retrieve the phone from the vent and put it in her bag before leaving. I needed to get that phone. When she came home in the evening, I watched her closely. She casually dropped her bag in the hallway and went about her evening routine. After dinner, she took a shower, and I checked her bag. There was no phone, so she must have hidden it in the ventilation unit when she went upstairs. Unbeknownst to her, the other side of the vent was in Sonia's room. Quietly, I crept into my daughter's bedroom and opened the window. There was the phone. I grabbed it, took it to my office, and cloned it onto my new phone. A few minutes later, I returned it and was almost closing the window when I heard my wife coming out of the shower. I sat by Sonia's bed and stroked her hair as my wife entered. She asked softly, "What are you doing?" I shook my head. "I like to come and sit with them from time to time," I whispered. "Just to remind myself how lucky I am to have such wonderful children." She smiled and said, "You're a soft old man. Let's go before you wake her up." The next day, I finally had a chance to look at the cloned phone. My world fell apart as I sat in my office, staring at the messages, tears streaming down my face. Eventually, Michelle, my secretary, came in. She was a reserved woman, dressed much older than her years, and our relationship had always been strictly professional. Michelle had dealt with a troublesome business partner before, who had harassed her. She had threatened to leave and sue if he didn't stop. When he gave an ultimatum, either she left or he did, I ended up owning 60% of the company. Michelle left immediately when she saw me, presumably to deal with whatever she was trying to call me about. I heard voices outside my office and then silence. Michelle returned, locked the door, and took a seat on the other side of my desk. She handed me some tissues from her seemingly endless supply. I took them and wiped my eyes. "Tell me," she said. I showed her the phone. There were text messages between Caroline and someone else. The messages didn't name anyone, but they talked about secret meetings and sex. The details were intimate, things only a long-term lover would know, like a small mole on the inside of her thigh and the sounds she made during sex. I was never mentioned, as if I didn't exist. "Do you know who she's seeing?" Michelle asked, her tone still professional. I shook my head. I told her about finding a small silver bookmark on the bathroom floor and the story behind the pills. It flowed like a river the whole time I was talking. She just sat there and looked at me. After a while, I noticed she was holding my hand. It was the first time I felt that we had actually touched each other. "You need more information," she said. "The children's DNA will be obtained on Wednesday. Can you hold out until then?" "I don't know," I replied. She nodded. "Our producers in Portland need to see you urgently," she continued. "I've booked you a ticket for the next flight. You'll be back on Thursday." "I can't think about it now," I said. "That's what you tell Caroline," she instructed. She took my phone, typed a text message, and sent it to Caroline. "Something happened in Portland. We need to go and figure it out. I'll be back on Thursday. Love you." The reply came almost instantly, "Okay. Let me know when you get there. I'll see you when you get back." She glanced at the phone for a second, her lips curling, then returned it to me and took out her own phone. "Lorraine," she said into it. "Michelle, yes, thank you. When are you free this afternoon?" "Great. See you then. Go get yourself an order," she told me in a businesslike manner. The tone of voice and the fact that I was almost conditioned by her to follow orders in the office meant I did just that. It was actually a relief not having to make decisions or plans for someone else. When I came out of the bathroom, she was holding my jacket. "Where are we going?" I asked. "You have an appointment with an old friend of mine," she said. I followed her to Lorraine, who turned out to be Michelle's best friend and also a divorce lawyer. Lorraine was apparently handling Michelle's divorce when she discovered her husband was cheating on her with one of his employees. Michelle explained the situation to Lorraine, and I watched in almost a daze. This wasn't happening to me. Lorraine had clearly seen this many times in her career. Once she had all the facts, she turned her attention to me. "Gary," she said. It wasn't me she was talking to. Someone else. I felt a sting in my cheek. Michelle had slapped me. I snapped out of my stupor and saw shock and amusement in Lorraine's eyes, but they quickly vanished when she looked back at me. "Gary," she asked again. I nodded. "Do you have any ideas about what you want to do?" At her words, my engineer brain kicked into gear. I was good at coming up with plans. "Kill them both," I said. I expected at least a shocked reaction from Michelle, but surprisingly, she even grinned. "Okay," said Lorraine. "I understand that, but unfortunately, it's not an option. It's against the law. However, we have several legal options. Let's go over them." "Before I start," she said, "I'm just laying out your options. I'm not advocating any of them at this point. We can discuss that later. The first option is to do nothing. She doesn't know that you know, and as far as I'm concerned, you've had a pretty happy life, so it shouldn't change. Keep up the good work playing the ignorant game. Secondly, an amicable divorce. File a statement of irreconcilable differences. Divide your company, home, and finances. She makes less than you, so you'll probably have to pay child support for her for several years, at least until the children graduate from high school. Thirdly, act aggressively. Sue for adultery. If the children aren't yours, sue for a fake birth certificate. Sue whoever the other party is for alienation of affection. If he's the father, sue him to get back all the money you spent on the kids. If he's a coworker, sue him for not following the fraternization policy. Nowadays, almost every company has such a policy. If the other party is married, provide their partner with all the information about the affair. If she knows, we might have a case against her. If not, maybe I can represent her interests in the divorce. Make it public, tell everyone, friends, relatives, colleagues. If she's a member of any societies or church groups, tell them too. Humiliate her as much as you can. We need to protect your assets. Sell your share of the company into an offshore trust, mortgage the house, take whatever you can. Cash out your 401k and throw a party in Vegas. My thoughts whirled like a storm. I immediately understood what she was suggesting. Option 1 was not acceptable. I wasn't willing to be a cuckold. I had been a weak, unaware cuckold for too long. Option 2 wasn't feasible either. I had invested too much time and effort into building the business and the lifestyle we had. She could forget about taking half and continuing to live off me while enjoying someone else's company. Option 3, I said, let's go nuclear. Lorraine smiled. Fine. I'll start filling out the paperwork. I'd suggest starting covert surveillance of your wife and trying to find out who, when, and where. We need more evidence. Can I keep this phone? You see, it's not doing you any good. I nodded and handed her the phone. Michelle and I left Lorraine's office, and she took me to a small family hotel where she had booked a room for me. Go take a shower and order something for your room, she said. I'll be back later with some things for you. I acted on autopilot. My whole world was falling apart, and I was sitting in a hotel room ordering room service as if it were a normal day. This was the only way I could cope with the stress. 9 years on the toilet. What really hurt was that I had been completely oblivious to all of this. How had I not noticed what she was doing? Who was it? The same boss she returned to after each child? She had told me she liked her job and her independence, but was that the real reason, or could she simply not stand being away from her lover for so long? I looked at the mini bar and was about to give in when Michelle entered the room. Don't even think about it, she said. I need you to think, not drown your sorrows. You need to plan, and you can't do that if you're looking at the world through the bottom of a bottle. Plan? I asked gloomily. I tried. I had a plan, and it was a good one. I had a loving wife and 2 gorgeous children. And now, look where I am. I have a cheating wife and I don't even know if those 2 children are mine. I'm the biggest cuckold in the world. My whole life is falling apart, and you want me to plan it all? She looked at me for a few moments, waiting for me to respond. Michelle's look was all business as she glanced at her watch. Okay, she said, the pity party is over. How many times did you face obstacles when we were starting the company? Your plans fell through more times than I can count. What does this have to do with anything? I don't know, I replied. A whole bunch, I guess. There was that time the patent office lost our application for an inversion filament, and we still managed to win the deal against Headingley. And the bank tried to foreclose on us early because they were under pressure. Right, she said. So, at what point during all those setbacks did you sit down, put your head in your hands, and give up? That was different, I said. Different how? She asked. What was different back then? Back then, I had something to fight for, I said. I had a family depending on me. And you still do, she said. Only now, it's a much larger family, 141 people and their families depending on you to keep the company going. None of your partners are capable of keeping the company afloat. You're the only businessman among you 3 engineers. If you lose, the company loses. Do you think Caroline cares about all these families depending on your company? If she gets half, she'll sell it to the highest bidder, and you'll lose control. Headingley will own everything you've worked on. Do you want that? I stared at her, realizing she was right. I'd worked too hard to let it all slip away to the highest bidder. I needed to secure my future and the future of my family. If the kids were mine, I'd make sure they were taken care of. But Caroline had made her bed. I could grieve the relationship later, once everything else was sorted. My confusion cleared, replaced by anger and determination. I sat down with Michelle and began to make plans. It was in that moment that everything started falling into place. The pain and indecision disappeared. I had no doubts. Michelle saw the change in my expression and nodded in satisfaction. "That's the kind of Gary I need right now," she said. "Someone who knows how to plan for the future." We spent the rest of the evening devising a strategy to secure the future of the company. Initially, I considered selling my shares to the partners, but Michelle rejected the idea. She believed I couldn't trust them to run the company properly. If they became the majority shareholders, they'd destroy it. I needed to maintain control. In the end, we decided to create an offshore trust where I would sell the company at market value. I'd remain as the CEO on a minimal salary. Since the trust was offshore, the courts wouldn't have jurisdiction over its documents, so the owners would remain anonymous. On paper, I'd be a millionaire, at least once everything was finalized. I needed to liquidate all my assets, including cashing out my 401k and freeing up the equity in the house. Although we bought the house together, it was only in my name since Caroline wasn't working at the time. I made a list of what needed to be done and contacted my lawyer to arrange a meeting for the next day. After Michelle left, I took a shower and went to bed, expecting to be restless. Instead, I fell asleep almost instantly and stayed out until my phone alarm woke me the next morning. There was a message from Caroline: "You didn't inform me of your arrival. Is everything okay? Sorry, I planned to stay up late and then fell asleep. Everything is coming together now. I should be back on Thursday. See you. Love you 20." I couldn't bring myself to respond. Michelle knocked on my door a little after 8. I took another shower and was about to head to breakfast when she suggested we go. We went to a diner down the street and had bacon and pancakes with maple syrup. Part of me couldn't grasp why I was acting so detached, as if my world hadn't collapsed and my heart wasn't breaking. My reasoning was that once the dust settled, it would all hit me, but for now, I had to focus on work. Michelle mentioned that Brian Spencer, my lawyer, had time to meet us at 10. We could go to the bank first to cash out my 401k and release equity from the house before heading to his office. I understood the importance of consolidating my money, but I worried about the record of having it all. "Can't the court just order me to pay her half if I still have it?" I asked. Michelle grinned. "That's where Vegas comes in. Once you have all this capital, you spend a week in Vegas and blow a lot of money. By the time you file for divorce, you'll appear poor and in debt. The bank will foreclose on your house, and your salary will barely cover living expenses. If the kids are yours, you'll put your entire 401k in trust for their college fund. Caroline won't be able to touch it. Technically, she'll earn more than you and may even end up paying you alimony. When will you get the DNA results?" she asked. The company said the results should be online sometime today. I checked my email and found a link. I clicked on it, but then hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready to see the results. Michelle asked, "Can I?" I pushed the phone towards her. She took it, scrolled through the screen a few times, and then looked up. "The results aren't ready yet," she said. "According to the tracking data, they should be up soon." I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Let's go, she said as she stood up. The bank should already be open. Freeing up equity in the house and cashing out my 401k surprisingly didn't take much time. I closed all our savings accounts, including our children's college funds, and transferred the money to a new account in my name. The only account I left alone was our joint checking account, which had less than $10,000 in it. My lawyer threw a wrench into our plans, but if it could be done properly, he'd find a way. "You're forgetting one thing," he said when we reviewed our plan with him. "You have a prenuptial agreement." "I do?" I was taken aback. I hadn't realized that was part of the partnership agreement when I started working. He reminded me, all partners were required to sign a prenuptial agreement to protect the company in case of a breakup. It only applies to the company's assets, though, not personal assets for divorce purposes. You're considered an employee of the company, so at most, it can claim your salary and 401k. "That's all?" I asked. "That's it," he confirmed. "What I'd suggest, and I don't mean to speak ill of your divorce lawyer, is to use all the equity you've freed up from the house and your 401k to invest in the company. Buy out one of your partners. I know Robert hinted he might be interested in selling. You don't have enough funds, but you could take out a loan from the company pension fund to cover the difference. Payments will be deducted from your salary, which means your income will drop significantly. When your assets are assessed, everything else will be tied to the company, so you'll be protected. Your credit rating will take a hit if the bank forecloses on your house, and you'll lose half of what's left in the bank, but other than that, she won't get anything. We can also make your salary less than hers, so she might end up paying you child support." "What will I live on?" I asked. "If my entire salary is tied up in loan payments, I'll need somewhere to live and eat. Not to mention, I have 2 kids." "Hold off on the kids for now," he said. "Have you decided what to do if they turn out not to be yours? Will you still be involved in their lives?" "I don't know," I said. "It's too terrible a thought to even consider. I'll have to wait until I know for sure before making any decisions." "Don't forget about the other parts of your plan regarding the other lawyers," he reminded me. "I'm confident you'll get enough from the lawsuit against her company to pay off the loan and return to a full salary once this is over. You can also demand reimbursement for expenses from the father of the children if it turns out they're not yours. Since this will happen after the divorce, it won't be part of the settlement agreement. Could you contact Robert on my behalf and see if he's interested in selling?" I asked. "I'm not sure I'm up for that right now." He nodded. "I'll call him and let you know." We shook hands and left his office. I felt a sense of relief as we exited the building. Plans were starting to come together, which always gave me a deep satisfaction. But then I remembered why we were making these plans, and my relief vanished, replaced by a hollow feeling in my chest. We were having lunch at a diner when I reluctantly looked at my phone again. I couldn't bring myself to do more than click on the link in the email before handing it over to Michelle. I watched her face, hoping for any sign that I might still be a father. "I'm so sorry, Gary," she said softly. It was the most unbusinesslike response I'd ever heard. She handed me the phone, and I read the results myself. Neither child was biologically mine. They had the same father, but it wasn't me. The double blow of losing both children was overshadowed by the rage I felt at the betrayal. Not only had she passed these children off as mine, but she also convinced me to have a vasectomy, meaning I could no longer have children of my own. "Gary," Michelle snapped, pulling me back to reality. "Now is not the time or place. Stay calm. We'll get through this, I promise." I took a few deep breaths, trying to suppress my anger. I was seething, tempted to hire a hitman to take out the man who fathered the children who were supposed to be mine. Michelle pulled herself together and led me out of the diner. "Lorraine called. She wants to see you," Michelle said, and we headed to Lorraine's office. Lorraine looked grim when we entered. "I have a preliminary report from a private investigator," she said. "Apparently, Caroline didn't waste any time. A man came to your house and stayed the night. We couldn't see inside. I have cameras installed in the house, I said. I can swap the flash drives and we can review the footage. Okay, she said. Do it now, then we'll make a plan. The information on those flash drives will be crucial. There will be an au pair there, I said. I can't go back myself, it's believed I'm out of town on business. Lorraine checked her phone. The au pair is at the play center with Sophie and James, she said. I'll keep an eye on her and let you know if she comes out. My house was about 30 minutes from Lorraine's office, and Michelle drove quickly. We arrived without incident, and I swapped out the flash drives. I quickly checked the house but didn't see anything unusual. We returned to Lorraine's office and reviewed the footage. I decided not to look at the bedroom footage, I didn't need to see what was happening there. It was clear from the other footage that the man who had come to the house was her boss, Bill Wright. What nearly destroyed me was seeing him enter the house. He had his own key and as he walked in, James looked up and shouted, "Papa Bill," and ran to hug him. This was too much. I broke down and started crying. Lorraine watched as I fell apart, and for the first time ever, Michelle hugged me and held me while I cried. It took a while, but eventually, I pulled myself together. "Do you want to rest for a bit?" Lorraine asked. I shook my head. The pain had lessened a bit, but anger was starting to take over. "What's next?" I asked. "I already have a copy of the terms of employment from your wife's company. There's an anti-fraternization clause, so you have a case against them for violating it. Since the person your wife is involved with is a top manager, the company can't claim ignorance about what's happening," Michelle explained. We briefed Lorraine on what my company's lawyer had advised. Her face lit up with a big smile as she picked up the phone and requested copies of the prenuptial agreement. She received them via email and, after reviewing the documents, she said, "This is perfect. Forget everything I said before. Your boyfriend's plan is spot on. If your partner wants to get out of the company, buy him out," Lorraine continued. "Invest everything you have into the company. That will make it immediately out of reach. We can sue her company for failing to comply with a court order, him for alienation of affection, her for false statements on her birth certificate, and both of them for expenses related to the children. The deduction for medical bills from childbirth alone is substantial. It all depends on whether Robert wants to sell. I guess we'll have to wait for his response," I said. Michelle drove me back to the hotel, and just as I was about to sit on the bed, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Michelle standing in the hallway. "You can't stay here," she said. "You'll only brood or hit the minibar. I want you where I can keep an eye on you." As she spoke, she collected my few belongings, took me by the hand, and led me out of the room. "Where are we going?" I asked, though I didn't really care. "To my house," she said. "I have a spare room you can use." "But," I began to protest. She turned and looked at me, silencing my objections. I had never been to Michelle's house before, so I was surprised to see it was almost the same size as mine. Our house had 2 floors, while hers had just one. She led me to a room with a bathroom and instructed me to take a shower and change. She ordered dinner, and we ate in silence. I suppose the food was delicious, but I barely tasted it. My mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, unable to calm down. I was furious but lacked the energy to express it. I was devastated but didn't have the strength to worry. All I could muster was enough energy to execute my plans. As I was contemplating what to do next, the phone rang. I tensed, hoping it wasn't Caroline. It wasn't. "Hello, Robert," I said wearily. "Why?" he asked simply. Robert and I had been friends since university. We studied together, and it was a project we worked on that laid the foundation for our business. Initially, I received a larger share of the company because I had more capital to invest. "Caroline is cheating on me," I said, my voice flat. "All this time?" "All this time," he said incredulously. "Do you mean none of the children are mine?" There was silence on the other end. So you want to tie all your assets to the company and hide behind the prenuptial agreement? He asked. Either Brian Spencer, our lawyer, explained everything, or you understand the partnership agreement better than I do, I said. I want to keep 5% and stay with the company as a consulting engineer. I'll discuss the details with HR. The rest is yours, Robert said. Okay, I replied. I'll ask Brian to prepare the documents. Gary, Robert said after a moment, I'm really sorry. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but it will get easier. I promise. I've been through something similar, and it does get better. I recalled that Robert had gone through a divorce about 4 years ago. I didn't know the details, but I knew it hadn't been pleasant. He had used the marriage contract himself. The next morning, Michelle woke me up with a cup of coffee. Let's go, she said. We still have a lot to do. Our first stop was to see Brian Spencer, the company's lawyer. He had already prepared all the documents for my buyout of Robert, and we completed the transaction in less than 30 minutes. I provided him with everything I had, my savings and my 401k. I also had to take out a loan against the company's pension plan for the remaining amount. So, on paper, I was about $1 million in debt, and my salary was nearly halved because the benefits were deducted before taxes. Next, we went to Lorraine's office. I showed her all the documents related to the deal, and she was thrilled. This is perfect, she said. I'll draft the documents today. We can submit them on Monday. If you want, we can serve her, him, and the company all at the same time. Where do you want her served? Lorraine asked. Where it will cause her the most embarrassment. If you could do it through a billboard at the Super Bowl, I'd gladly pay for it, I said. Lorraine laughed. We'll serve her in the office on Monday at 10 a.m., assuming the papers go through the court before then. If I send them today, I should have them by tomorrow afternoon. I nodded. So what now? I asked Michelle. We have 2 more stops before you head back to the office and pretend you've just returned from Portland, she said. Can you hold out at home until Monday? I think I'll have to, I said. No need to guess, Michelle said. Tell me what you need to get through this time. I don't know, I admitted. Michelle smiled. Then let's go. To my surprise, we stopped at the medical center where I had my checkups and the procedure that meant I would never be a father. What are we doing here? I asked. Did you want good news? Michelle replied. Let's go. I followed her into the clinic and stood aside while she went to the reception desk. The administrator nodded and motioned for us to sit. Less than 2 minutes later, my doctor came out and invited me into the consultation room. I looked at Michelle, who nodded and followed me. Dr. Harrington made no comment about my secretary's involvement in the consultation. He knew both who she was and that she was not my wife, as he was both my doctor and Caroline's. Why did I ask my secretary to come with me? I asked. That's your business, Gary, he said. Dr. Harrington explained that a vasectomy reversal was possible. My eyes widened. Is that really an option? I asked, glancing at Michelle, who had a small smile on her face. Yes, it is, Dr. Harrington confirmed. Given that your vasectomy was performed 3 years ago, the success rate for reversal procedures is around 95%. The surgery is a bit more involved than the original procedure and requires general anesthesia, but I'm confident you'll be able to father children again once it's done. Tears filled my eyes again. There was still a chance to become a father, though it would require surgery. It seemed a small price to pay for the possibility of having children of my own. I didn't know who I'd have children with, but at least it was possible. I know it's hard to accept, Dr. Harrington said, handing me information about the procedure and its cost. Unfortunately, it won't be covered by your insurance. If you'd like to proceed, let me know, and we can schedule you for testing. Thank you, Doctor, Michelle said as she took the information. We'll be in touch. I allowed her to lead me out of the clinic and towards her car. "Is this good news?" she asked, smiling softly at me. On impulse, I hugged her tightly and buried my face in her hair. "Thank you," I whispered. Then I realized what I'd done. I quickly pulled away and stepped back. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Gary," she said softly, "it's okay. Everything is fine." We got into her car. "One more stop, then back to the office," she said. Michelle told me that she had visited Bill Wright's house several times over the years that Caroline worked for him. Bill and his wife, Stephanie, lived in a nice neighborhood just outside the city. It was a gated community where they held some corporate events. "Why are we going there?" I asked. Michelle got out of the car and walked to the front door of the house. I followed her. She didn't even need to knock. Stephanie, informed by the security guard, was already waiting at the door. "Gary," Stephanie greeted me. "You must be Michelle. Was it you who called?" "Yes," Michelle replied. "That's right. Come on in," Stephanie said, leading us into an office-like room off the hallway. The room was Bill's office, judging by the photographs on the table and the walls. Stephanie sat at the table and gestured for us to sit across from her. "How can I help you?" she asked, looking at me. I sat there, unable to speak. "Did you know?" I finally asked. Stephanie sighed sadly. "I suspected, but I didn't know for sure. I could never find any concrete evidence, nothing I could take to a lawyer. Otherwise, I would have sued him for every penny he had," she said. Michelle muttered, "Do you have evidence?" I nodded. "I have proof that none of my children are mine. They have the same father, and there's video of him and Caroline at my house where my son calls him Papa Bill." I couldn't finish my sentence, the lump in my throat choked me up, and I was lost again. "Oh, Gary, I'm so sorry," Stephanie said. "I suspected for years that he and Caroline were involved, but he was so careful. I followed him, checked his phone and email, even confronted him. But he managed to convince me that I was just paranoid. The private investigators I hired didn't find anything. If I had been sure, I would have come to you immediately. I didn't want to ruin what seemed like a happy marriage based on suspicion alone. I needed proof." "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I wondered if I should reveal my plans to her. Would she tell Bill as soon as he got home? It might be too late for him to do anything significant, but I wanted it to be as shocking for him as it was for me. "Now that you have proof, what are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But I want to make sure he understands what he's done." Stephanie smiled slightly. "I understand. I don't blame you. If you need the name of a good divorce lawyer, I can help with that." Michelle handed Stephanie a business card from her purse. "Here's a contact. Will a week be enough?" she asked. Stephanie took the card. "Great, thank you. I'll reach out to them." As our meeting concluded, Stephanie gave me a quick hug and a peck on the cheek. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "Take care of him," she told Michelle, who flinched slightly at the touch. "He deserves better than what that jerk did to him." We returned to the office, and I spent the rest of the day catching up on tasks from my trip to Portland. When I got home, Michelle knocked on my door at her usual time and informed me she was going home. She was back to being the professional she always was, which left me feeling adrift. I thought I was starting to get closer to her, but maybe that was just my imagination. I wished her good night and thanked her for her help. I worked late into the evening, catching up on everything. A message from Caroline arrived around 8. "What time will you be home?" "Probably another hour or two," I replied. "I need to finish up some things after the trip. I'll probably be asleep already. I have to get up early in the morning. I love you." Again, I couldn't bring myself to respond. I continued working until nearly 11, hoping she'd be asleep when I got home. The less I had to communicate with her, the better I'd feel. When I finally returned home, the house was dark, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I checked on Sonia and James, They were both asleep and looking as adorable as ever. A sob welled up in my chest, and I had to hide in the bathroom. I couldn't let Caroline see me crying over children who weren't even mine. I still hadn't decided what to do about the children. It's unlikely they remember me if I just left. I had no responsibility to them, but I loved them both. How could I abandon them when, less than 48 hours ago, they were my children, my flesh and blood, my pride and joy? Now they were just more evidence of my wife's infidelity. I decided to wait and see what happened next. In any case, the decision might not go in my favor. I went to bed, doing my best not to wake anyone. When the alarm woke me up in the morning, Caroline had already left. The housekeeper was in the kitchen feeding the kids. I looked at her, wondering if she knew about everything that had happened. Could she really be laughing at me, the fool who couldn't even satisfy his wife? Did she know the kids weren't even mine? Did she say goodnight to them like she used to with Papa Bill? My mind raced, imagining her and Caroline with Bill Wayne while the kids cried in the next room. I shook my head angrily. I knew what I had to do on Monday. I'd make sure she never worked as an au pair again. I'd inform the agency. But then I questioned whether taking my anger out on someone with little control over the situation was the right move. Maybe she had genuine feelings for the children, whom she'd cared for even before Sonia was born. I was angry, but perhaps not at the wrong person. I headed to work, and when I arrived, Michelle was already in the office. It was like the events of the past few days hadn't happened. She was all business, though I noted she had cleared my schedule for what she called marketing. I settled into my office, and Michelle brought me my morning coffee, a routine she had maintained for 9 years. She sat down on the other side of the table, and only then did I realize she had brought coffee for herself as well, a first. "Marketing?" I asked. "Since when am I involved in marketing?" Michelle grinned, an almost mischievous smile that somehow felt comforting. "We need to make a plan. The final part of Lena's strategy. Tell everyone," she said. "Her friends, family, church groups, volunteer organizations, everyone she interacts with needs to know who she is and what she's done." "That'll make me look bad," I said. "I'll become a laughingstock, a cuckold raising other people's children." "You have to tell your story," Michelle insisted. "If you don't, Caroline will, and it'll be worse. People might think you're an abusive husband or neglectful father. They'll believe it, and when we strike back, she'll retaliate with everything she's got. Speak up first, and people will be less likely to believe her counterclaims." "Sure, some will believe it, but nothing can be done about that." Michelle put together a media package containing all the evidence of Caroline's infidelity, the private investigator's report, a copy of the DNA test proving I wasn't the father of my 2 children, videos from our home, including one of James greeting Bill, and other disturbing footage from the bedroom that I had not seen and did not want to. Later that morning, I received an email from Lorraine. Apparently, Stephanie had provided a DNA sample from Bill. It matched the test results I received, confirming he was indeed the father of both children. I paused. The realization hit me, I had stopped thinking of them as my children. We updated the media package with this new information and prepared it for distribution. It would be sent to Caroline's parents, my parents, and her brother and sister, whom I was close to. Electronic copies would be sent to all her Facebook and LinkedIn contacts, as well as anyone else I could think of. We arranged for the packages to be delivered at 10 a.m. on Monday, the exact time the balloon would go up. I just needed to get through the weekend. I devised a plan. As an engineer, it took me less than an hour to design and build a small device with a motor, a timer, and a battery. I set it up to vibrate at a specific time. When I got home on Friday night, I hid the device under Sophie's pillow. It was set to go off at 6 a.m. the next day, around the time we usually woke up. This would wake Sophie and disrupt our weekend morning routine. Everything worked as planned. Sophie climbed into bed with us, and there was no sex. I spent Saturday catching up on chores Caroline had been nagging me about for months. When she commented on it, I simply said it was about time they were done. On Saturday night, when Caroline tried to initiate sex, I pretended to be asleep. On Sunday, Sophie woke up because of the device, which disrupted her sleep. We decided to take the kids to the zoo for the day. Throughout the day, I looked at Caroline, the woman I loved, whom I thought loved me, and at the children I cared for, thinking they were mine. It was almost too much to bear. I bit the inside of my cheek until it bled, trying to hold back my emotions, but I managed to get through the weekend. On Monday, I was eager to get things moving. I told Caroline I would work from home and wanted to speak with the au pair. Caroline left for work at her usual time, popping her head into my office to say goodbye. I pretended to be absorbed in emails and just grunted in response. I heard her car leave the garage and the door close behind her. At 8:15, the au pair knocked on my office door. She wanted to take the kids to the play center, but I said no. They should stay at home. This surprised her, as I had never turned her down before. She just nodded and went back to the children. I heard James upset because he couldn't go. A little after 9 o'clock, Lorraine arrived at the house. I was surprised but let her in. For the first time, I made coffee for her. At 9:30, we had a conference call with Lorraine. "Gary," Lorraine said, "this is your last chance to back out. I'm not saying you should, but if you've had a change of heart over the weekend, now's the time to say so." "No," I said firmly. "I'm sure." "Okay, then," Lorraine said. "I'll see you on the other side." When everything was set, I kept a close watch on my email inbox, waiting for the service confirmation emails. The first one arrived precisely at 10 a.m., the second came 3 minutes later, and the third arrived 5 minutes after that. Then my phone rang. It wasn't Caroline, as I had expected, but my mother. "Gary, hi Mom," I answered. "What's going on?" she asked. "I read the package you sent," I said. "So you know as much as I do. Caroline has been cheating on me, probably throughout our entire marriage, with her boss. The children aren't mine. I'm divorcing her." "Gary, you can't." "No, Mom, I have to. I have other calls," I said, ending the call. The phone rang immediately again. This time, it was Caroline. "Gary," she said. I didn't answer, waiting for her to continue. "We need to talk," she said. Still no response from me. "I'm coming back home," she said and ended the call. "Caroline is on her way," I told Michelle. "I'm stepping out." Michelle nodded. I wanted to ask her to stay, but I didn't know how. I just looked at her. "Call me," she said, "when you find out what's going on." She left, and Caroline arrived home about 20 minutes later. I heard her car pull up. She didn't even bother using the garage. I wasn't sure what to expect when she walked into the house, whether she would come unarmed or slink away. She walked into my office and sat down across from me at the table. "Gary, she began. "I'm not interested," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear a single word from you. You lied to me for 9 years. Neither child is mine, but you convinced me to get a vasectomy while you were still on the pill so you could keep seeing Daddy Bill." Her eyes widened. "No, Caroline," I continued. "I don't care what you have to say. My lawyer's card is in the package you received when you were served. If you think there's anything I need to know, talk to her." "What about the children?" she asked. "What children?" I answered. "I don't have children. If it were up to you, I would never have had them. I'd ask why you did this to me, but I don't want to hear another lie. I'm not interested in your excuses or justifications. I want this to end so I can pick up the pieces of my life and move on." I called the au pair into the room. She could hear me because the office door was open and she was just in the next room. "You're fired," I said. "Leave immediately." "What? Why?" she asked. Because you covered for her, I said, pointing at Caroline. You knew she was having an affair with her boss. I don't know if you knew the kids weren't mine, but you definitely knew what was going on. I have video evidence of you talking to Bill about the children. Get out. Gary, you can't fire her, Caroline said. I pay her salary. The au pair looked at Caroline with gratitude in her eyes. Okay, I said. I've already contacted the agency and informed them that you were complicit in the affair. They agreed to remove you from their register if they don't have to deal with any repercussions. If Caroline wants to keep you, she'll not only have to pay you but also handle all the other expenses, taxes, vacation, pension, sickness, insurance. Your face went pale. Not only did you lose your job, but you're now off the agency's books, which will make it almost impossible for you to find other domestic work. The au pair's face lost all color. Now get out, I said, and she hurried away. Did you have to do that? Caroline said. She shouldn't have been involved, I replied. I told you I don't want to hear it. What I want is for you to pack your things, take your kids, and get out of my house. This is my home too, she said. According to the documents, no, I said. It's registered in my name only, so until the courts decide otherwise, get out. She jumped slightly when I shouted. James entered the room. Mommy, he said. Caroline, with a stunned expression and tears streaming down her face, stood up and walked towards her daughter. I closed the office door and stayed inside while she packed her things. A few minutes later, she returned, holding Sonia in her arms. Are you going to say goodbye to Sonia? She asked. Not this, I said. She's not my daughter, and he's not my son. Take them to Papa Bill and let him take care of his own children. They have nothing to do with me. Gary, please, she begged. I heard the front door close, and a few minutes later, her car started up. She was gone. I exhaled a breath I had been holding for what felt like an eternity and collapsed. I hadn't heard the door open and jumped when I felt arms around me. I looked up to see Michelle holding me. She pulled me close and hugged me as I sobbed. It took a while, but I eventually pulled myself together. I had just thrown away 9 years, my marriage, my children, my life. I didn't want to face the world anymore. Michelle took charge again. Let's go, she said. Lorraine said it would take Caroline about 4 hours to get an emergency warrant to occupy the house since it's a matrimonial home and she has children. Do you really want to give her the satisfaction of throwing you out of your own home? We packed some of my clothes and important documents. I had to figure out where to stay, but I loaded my stuff into Michelle's car and left. We first went to the office where I had been served. Later that day, Lorraine called to let me know that there was not only an order to occupy the house but also a restraining order, which meant I was forbidden from coming within 100 meters of the house. If I needed to pick up anything, I would have to make an appointment and be accompanied by Caroline's attorney at my own expense. Confused by what was happening, I discovered that I had moved into Michelle's spare room. All my clothes were in the closet, and my papers were neatly organized in the office cabinets. A week had passed since Caroline filed. I would work and then return with Michelle to her house for dinner and sleep. In the morning, she brought me coffee, cooked breakfast, and we went to the office together. It seemed like nothing had changed between us. She remained all business, and except for a hug on the first day when I broke down at home, I never smiled at her. However, I had no reason to smile. On Monday morning, we had an appointment with the lawyers representing the company where Caroline and Bill worked. I wasn't entirely clear on the details, but apparently, we had filed a claim for an amount the company couldn't cover. They had insurance, but the maximum payout was $1 million, and our claim was for much more. Their lawyers were all businesslike, while Lorraine, my lawyer, had a Cheshire cat grin. What needs to be done? Their lawyer asked. Your client needs to agree to immediate and permanent dismissal without pension benefits, Lorraine replied, and also to keep Caroline on staff for at least 3 years. We are also asking for $1.5 million. I wasn't fully focused as they exchanged words. In the end, they agreed to all the terms, but I would only receive $750,000. This would cover part of the debt I owed to the company pension fund. Lorraine assured me that all this would be settled after the divorce was finalized. The company's lawyers nodded in understanding. Lorraine stayed with us for the next meeting, which was with Bill Wainwright's lawyers. I left their office $500,000 richer, which allowed me to completely repay the pension fund loan and still have some money left over. My final meeting of the day was with Caroline's lawyers. Caroline was in the office with them but didn't look at me when I entered. Melly and Lorraine were with me. "This divorce settlement is simply ridiculous," Caroline's lawyer began. "Your client is the major shareholder and CEO of a company valued at around $20 million, not to mention the assets in the house, savings, and 401k. "Let me stop you right there," Lorraine interrupted, pulling a stack of papers from her briefcase. "According to the prenuptial agreement signed by all parties, the company is not subject to divorce. My client has recently made a significant additional investment in the company, using most of his savings, his entire 401k, and a home equity loan. He also had to take out a loan from the company's pension fund. One of the partners wanted to sell the company, and it was crucial that the shares didn't fall into the hands of a competitor who had been trying to take over the business for years. Because of the pension fund loan, he is now on a reduced salary, earning less than your client. We will be requesting the court to establish a maintenance agreement to support him while he recovers financially." "What about the children?" asked Caroline's lawyer. "There is DNA evidence that these children are not his," Lorraine replied. "Caroline deliberately falsified birth records to list my client as the father with the intent to defraud. Additionally, we are seeking damages for serious assault, as she knowingly persuaded him to undergo surgical sterilization under the belief that he was the father. The alternative," Lorraine continued, "is for your client to sign the divorce as is, pack up her belongings, and leave the marital home. She will receive half of the joint account, which currently holds $944,315. The lawyer glanced at the papers, then at Caroline. For the first time, she looked at me. "Gary," she said. "Please," I replied. "Years?" she asked. "9, I said. "Damn 9 years. You lied to me for 9 years, day after day. You have nothing to say that I want to hear." Caroline looked at her lawyer and nodded. She signed the papers. I wasn't there when she left the house. I received a letter from her lawyer saying the restraining order had been lifted and the house was now mine. I considered going back to the house but decided against it. Instead, I put it on the market. The sale didn't cover the full amount I owed the bank, but I made up the difference, and the bank was satisfied. 2 months later, I was still living in Michelle's spare room. After the divorce, Caroline moved in with her parents. Despite all the evidence I provided, they were firmly on her side and refused to speak with me. For me, this wasn't a loss. Stephanie, however, didn't divorce Bill as she promised. I didn't know why and didn't want to find out. Bill lost his corporate job and pension, so they had to sell their house in the gated community and move into a small apartment. Bill found a decent job, though not as lucrative as before. I didn't know if Stephanie and Caroline had met. I hadn't seen Stephanie since that day at her lawyer's office and had no interest in doing so. I was at my desk at work when Michelle knocked and entered without waiting for a response. "Bill Wainwright is dead," she said, bluntly. "What?" I asked. "It turns out Stephanie caught him with Caroline again. She shot him," Michelle explained. I leaned back in my chair, a huge grin spreading across my face. I tried to control it, but I couldn't. Nothing could have happened to a nicer guy. Michelle laughed. "Are you angry?" she asked. "Why would I be? I'm happy about this," I replied. "Not at all," Michelle said. "This bastard got what he deserved. By the way, this just arrived." She placed an official envelope on my desk. We both knew what was inside. I opened it. "That's all?" I asked. "Yep." "Finally, a free man," Michelle said. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She kissed me. It wasn't just a peck on the cheek or lips but a full-fledged kiss, complete with tongue and caressing fingers. When she finally pulled away, I sat back in my chair, gasping and startled. Michelle looked down, giggling at my obvious excitement. "For 9 years," she said, "I took care of you. You're the most perfect man I've ever met. You never looked at me the wrong way, never checked me out or groped me, and I loved you for it. I've been waiting for you for 9 years. Now that you're free, I know you've always respected me, and that's a kind of love too. We're a great team. I know you as well as any wife knows her husband, and if you think about it, you know me just the same. Give me a chance to show you that not all women are unfaithful or treacherous." I was stunned. I remembered all the time I had spent with her before discovering the betrayal and thought about how I had treated her. I had defended her fiercely against my business partner, even to the point of getting him kicked out of the company. While working closely with Michelle, I began to realize that I had, and still have, genuine feelings for her. It dawned on me that it's almost impossible to work so closely with someone for an extended period without developing some kind of emotional connection. When I was with Caroline, there was no need to explore these feelings or evaluate them, but now there was a definite need to do so. "Do you have anything to say?" Michelle asked, a look of concern on her face. It was the first time I had seen her uncertain. "How many?" I asked. She looked puzzled. "How many of what?" "Children," I replied. "How many children should we have?"